even during or after today's service, you might be thinking, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't be cruel to people because of their body size or make fun of people for being fat. But really, obesity is a health issue. Lizzo is the stage name of American singer, rapper, and flautist Melissa Vivian Jefferson. She's 35. She's won 4 Grammys, 2 Soul Train Awards, a Billboard Award, a BET Award, and been nominated for countless others. She's performed at the Glastonbury Festival and headlined Pride festivals in Indianapolis and Sacramento. She's been a musical guest on Saturday Night Live. She's glamorous, loves fashion, favors heavy makeup, and her costumes certainly live in the same neighborhood as those worn by Madonna, Lady Gaga, and Dua Lipa. And she's fat. Her Instagram handle is LizzoBeEating. She has an Amazon Prime reality show called Lizzo's Watch Out for the Big Girls, in which plus-size women are in a contest to become some of her backup singers and dancers. I think it says a lot that she's notable for being a sexy pop star who's fat. But what it says is that fat people shouldn't dress to be sexy, shouldn't dance, and shouldn't live out loud and be who they are. Her dog died this past Christmas Eve. And she's being sued by former employees for sexual harassment and weight shaming. She denies the charges. She says, "I'm a proud black woman. I love my plus-size body, and I celebrate every inch of it as sexy and beautiful. I believe in hard work, striving for perfection, and constantly pushing myself to do better." I've been a fan for a few years since she burst onto the scene because it's way cool having a fat superstar. But if the allegations against her are true, it certainly fits the pattern for people who, being oppressed for whatever reason, internalize the reasons for that and behave that way themselves. So I hope it's not true, but I don't know. I liked seeing Lizzo out there. She's a reminder that I can be who I am no matter what size I am. And I like that. As a kid, I was called lots of names. Fat, fatso, pudgy, stout, roly-poly, tubby. The one I hated most that a friend's mom used all the time, pleasingly plump. I loved Mrs. Gagney, but come on. Even a 10-year-old kid knows what you're doing with that. On my 10th birthday, May 14th, 1976, was a Friday. And I went to Kmart because I wanted to buy something with the $10 my grandmother had sent me. And $10 was a lot more in 1976 than it is today. So I thought I was filthy rich beyond all imagining. And I can't tell you what I bought today because of what happened next. I've totally forgotten the other part of the day. After Kmart, we went next door to Baroni's. Baroni's was the local pharmacy. A locally owned pharmacy owned by the Baroni family in Fitchburg and Leominster, Massachusetts. Before Walgreens and Rite Aid and CVS bought everybody out. A good old-fashioned pharmacy with a soda fountain where you could get burgers and hot dogs and lime rickeys and ice cream floats and milkshakes. Baroni's made the best milkshakes. They were better than Friendly's. They were better than Dairy Queen. They were better than everybody. And I remember what I got at Baroni's. With the little money I had left over, I got the current issue of The Amazing Spider-Man. And my mom bought me a chocolate milkshake. My birthday was perfect until we walked back to the car. and passed by Mr. Fournier. Mr. Fournier was one of the coaches in the Little League I played in, not of my team, but one of the other teams. And as we're walking back to the car, he sees me and says, "Hey, Pudge, watch the milkshakes. Can't move fast behind the plate and throw people out when you're too heavy." Seriously? And he winked at me. My mom gave him the look that she gave me when I was in big trouble. And she pulled my arm and shuffled me into the car before I, or more likely, she, said anything. I had a thought briefly, I remember, of throwing the milkshake at him, but I'm not wasting this. Oh, man. Each month, I give a spiritual challenge based on our monthly theme. This month's was to do an examination of conscience for lingering prejudices. And to get people started, I suggested 3 topics. One was being fat, another was being poor, and another was being uneducated. And I gave you some resources and some suggested reading. Has anybody looked at the spiritual challenge this month? It's available on the website. Notices come in your e-newsletter. I don't just give you cool stuff up here on Sundays. This is a 24/7 operation. Yay! Excellent! Woohoo! Yay! I was very happy to hear that the men's coffee group in Danbury changed their monthly topic this month to do my challenge instead. And they're taking it over into next month's meeting. I think that's what they said. I can't remember exactly. Something like that. But they've got a lot of stuff to tell me when I have a moment. Many good-hearted people, and all of us here, are aware of prejudice and understand that even the best of us have certain biases and prejudices. And sometimes they're unconscious and ingrained in us because of where we've been, how we were raised, what we've been exposed to, our culture. We know this. You've probably done some work, or even a great deal of work, unlearning white supremacy, engaging in combating racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and other glaring prejudices that we hold up so often and so powerfully, and so rightly so. But my challenge to you is to look underneath the prejudices that might be hiding under the bed or in the closet where we sweep everything. We're not currently dealing with it. You don't do that? I do that. It's all in the bed and the closet and stuff. And take a look at what's overlooked, especially by us well-educated, well-meaning, good-hearted liberals. One of those might be attitudes about fat and obesity and body image. Reflect for a minute. What was it like to do that fatitudes meditation? What about the true and false questions? Did you learn anything about any bias you might have that you might not have been aware of? Did you learn something about the actual causes of obesity? It's okay to not be righteous about this. No one is. I'm not, and I'm fat. I know that it's so easy to fall into these different types of thinking, and I do it about all kinds of things. I think we all do. We're human. If you want to dive deeper into attitudes and biases about fat people, there's a great questionnaire published by IDR Labs that really gets you thinking about your ideas of this and tells you where your thinking may be more prejudiced and less. It's a pretty well-designed survey to do this. This is what this company does. And so you could take a look at that if you wanted to. There's a link to it in my spiritual challenge this month. And I make videos that are posted on YouTube about the spiritual challenge with all that stuff in the description. You can click the links so you can find it there. even during or after today's service, you might be thinking, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't be cruel to people because of their body size or make fun of people for being fat. But really, obesity is a health issue. And it's not okay to just tell people it's okay to be fat. Well, that's exactly the problem, isn't it? Fat liberation is not telling people it's okay to be unhealthy. You may not be aware of something called Healthy at Every Size, trademarked by the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health. They advocate a non-diet approach to promote a gentler way to health than weight loss at all costs. In a May 2022 online essay, registered dietitian Kara Rosenblum quoted Veronica Garnett and Annie Jansen of that organization said, "Our current 5 principles are weight inclusivity, health management, respectful care, life-enhancing movement, and eating for well-being." Sounds healthy enough for everybody. Gary Taubes directs us to the science so we get fat straight. And we're learning more and more and more all the time about what actually causes obesity. He says, the science itself makes clear that hormones, enzymes, and growth factors regulate fat tissues, and that we do not get fat because we overeat. We get fat because carbohydrates in our diet make us fat. The science tells us obesity is ultimately the result of a hormonal imbalance, not a caloric one. Specifically, the stimulation of insulin secretion caused by eating easily digestible carbohydrate-rich foods, refined carbohydrates, including white flour, cereal grains, starchy vegetables like potatoes, and sugars like sucrose and high fructose corn syrup. Why have obesity rates skyrocketed? Because over the last century, our American diet has become increasingly full of refined, simple sugars like this, where they're easy to get, full of what I like to call scientifically engineered food-like products, frequently full of cornstarch and high fructose corn syrup and things like that. Now, they're everywhere and in everything. I never became more aware of how ever-present corn syrup was until my son was born, and he has many food allergies, one of which is corn. Corn syrup is in children's medication. When he was a kid, we had to have all his medicine compounded at a pharmacy so it wouldn't be made with cornstarch or corn syrup, which were in virtually all of them. Children's Tylenol, children's ibuprofen, children's anything that had flavor or sweetness in it. It's everywhere, including in urban food deserts, where the convenience stores are not full of fresh produce. They're full of Doritos and hot dogs and ice cream. We spent the 1970s telling everyone to avoid fat at all costs. Fats were bad for us. But we substituted them with non-fat things that were all refined carbohydrates. And surprisingly, obesity rockets in our country have skyrocketed since then. We know that the overwhelming vast majority of people who lose any substantial amount of weight gain it back. The diet and exercise mantra has not led to any decrease whatsoever in obesity rates. Maybe, just maybe, there's something else going on. We need to reevaluate the way we approach fat, obesity, and health. When is weight truly causing and not a symptom of poor health? We assume fat is bad, so we don't yet fully study how people like my wife, and it's okay with her that I say this today, is obese and yet runs half marathons, swims 1.5 miles 4 times a week, and does every other thing you'd think a regular healthy person would do. Her blood pressure's fine, right? Like Aubrey Gordon says, we go through her whole list of accomplishments. Her blood pressure's fine, her blood sugar's fine, all that stuff. Our assumptions and prejudices get in the way of using the science to actually figure out the real solutions. And when science finds what's really going on, the social stigma and stagnant attitudes keep even doctors and medical professionals from using that information effectively. Not only is being fat not some type of character deficiency and moral flaw, it has a systemic justice component in much the way all other injustices and oppressions do. And just like people who experience all types of other discrimination and scorn and shaming and shunning, fat people don't want to be just tolerated. Toleration is not the goal. We want to be included. We want equity. We want justice. We want fairness. We want to walk into any store that sells clothing and be able to actually find something we can wear instead of having to go to a special store just designed for us people who are fat. And even then, it can be very hard to find stuff. Did you ever notice that my suit coat wardrobe is pretty limited? Did you ever notice that I wear basically the same two coats all the time? Because it's impossible to find one in my size. I can find pants, but I can't find suit coats just because the weird combination I have of here, shoulders, and arm length don't match anything off the rack. And I can't afford to have a bunch of suits tailor-made. Pain in the butt. Now, I want to point you to Sabrina Strings and Linda Bacon, who make an argument in an article in Scientific American in 2020 that bias against fat people is actually a larger driver of so-called obesity epidemic than adiposity or obesity itself. A 2015 study in Psychological Science found that people who reported experienced weight discrimination had a 60% increased risk of dying, regardless of their body size and actual health. Chronic diseases such as diabetes or heart conditions are labeled lifestyle diseases when the behaviors are not the central problem. Fat liberation, like all liberation movements, needs to be approached as being intertwined and connected to other struggles such as racism and sexism and poverty. And the history of fat shaming can be directly tied to racist attitudes toward black bodies. Do you know the story of Sarah Bartman? Sarah Bartman was an enslaved woman from the Eastern Cape of South Africa. Her ample bosom and large rear end were said to be examples of, quote, primitive African body type. She was put on display around Europe where people paid admission to see her in 18th century freak shows. She was called the Hottentot Venus. People paid extra with their admission to poke her with a finger or a stick. Eventually, she was prostituted and people paid extra. She died at the age of 26 in 1815. I can't imagine why. Scientists preserved her body parts, and her remains were used to support racist ideas about Africans and black bodies for decades after her death. In 2002, after decades of requests, her remains were returned to South Africa for proper honor and burial. Yvette Dion's 2019 essay, Here's What Fat Acceptance Is and Isn't, in Yes Magazine lists a slew of studies. I'll give you a couple headlines from a very long list. 2010, University of Michigan. Kids who are obese are 65% more likely to be bullied than peers of normal weight. USC study, 2016. The top 100 films released in 2016 found only 2 women larger than a size 14 cast as a lead or co-lead. Of the top 50 rated TV shows that year, only 3 women leads were larger than size 14. In 2017, Fairy Good Boss website found fat employees earned $1.25 less an hour on average for doing the same job as non-fat workers. A 2003 study found 50% of the primary care physicians surveyed viewed obese patients as, quote, awkward, unattractive, ugly, and non-compliant. You can still be fired for being fat in 49 states, including Connecticut. Yay, Michigan. There are a number of anti-discrimination against fat laws going through legislatures. An existing federal law on anti-discrimination has not yet held up on appeal anywhere. All cases have been lost. Quite often, when people try to lose weight, they're not trying to lose weight for its own sake, merit-worthy or not as it might be. They're trying to lose weight to get away from the discrimination and mistreatment and difficulty that goes with being fat. Not to get rid of being fat itself. I was once told, this is a true story, by a member of a congregation I was serving at the time, that I needed to lose weight and get in better shape because fat people weren't as good for marketing for the church.
Oh my God.
True story. How prevalent does all this fat prejudice get? Again, I want to tell you a story from my wife, who's an Episcopal priest. And this past summer, she took some of her vacation time and went to Portland, Oregon, where she's from, to sing in the William Byrd Festival. If you don't know William Byrd, I didn't know, is a Renaissance Elizabethan era composer who wrote church music for the Anglican and Catholic Church and was not persecuted for being Catholic because the monarchs liked him. Yeah, I didn't know any of it either. But that's not the point of the story. The point is, like many ministers when we travel, we find a preaching gig somewhere, one, to make a little extra money, and two, if you work somewhere where you're there, you can write the travel off on your taxes. So she was preaching at an Episcopal church in Portland, Oregon, one of the Sundays she was out there, and her topic was fat liberation. The prescribed reading from the Christian scriptures, she's an Episcopalian, for that day was from chapter 15 of the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus says, quote, "Listen and understand, it is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth that defiles." Oh, and she went off on it. Her sermon was great. Her sermon was about fat people and fat phobia and how, the jokes and cruelty and discrimination aren't cool and that's not what, Jesus asked you to do and that stuff. And a few days later, the hate mail started arriving. Bunches of it to the church that hosted her. And they said, "Do you want us to forward some of this? It's pretty nasty." She said, "Yeah, I want to see it." It was awful. Dozens of emails and actual letters to the church. I mean, there wasn't even 100 people there. How did 30% of them or something, complain? It's crazy. So this is a quote I pulled, one of the only ones I could actually read in public in church. "You're taking the gospel lesson in which Jesus says that righteousness depends on what comes out of our mouths rather than what goes in. Turning it into a call for gluttony and obesity was bizarre. This may also explain why there are no young people here. My daughter, thankfully, has established good eating and exercise habits, but your call to obesity would have most parents of young people scrambling for our exits." The kicker is, this guy is a university history professor, which we found out because she knows, the rector at that parish. And Tuesday, some of you have met Tuesday, Tuesday's fat. And her call to kindness and inclusion and compassion for fat people resulted in hatred directed at a fat woman for being fat. Craziness, just craziness. But as bad as it can get, there are awesome stories of hope. So, some of you may know in 2017 I published a novel based on the time I spent teaching in a Catholic high school. And this novel was called Saint Somebody Catholic High School. And I gave it that title because in the story, the Catholic high school is named after some so totally obscure Irish saint. I looked some up that would be totally obscure. And no one called it by that name. They called it Saint Somebody in the story. And it had its own website. And spoiler alert, it was not a bestseller. For a couple years, I made a couple $100 in royalties, but sales have petered out. But just after the COVID quarantine began in 2020, I got an email from someone I didn't know in Australia named Sophie Henderson Smart, offering to buy the domain name of my website for the novel, which was saintsomebody.com. And the reason why she wanted to buy it is awesome. Fashion designer Sophie Henderson Smart had started a business in Australia in 2018 making top-of-the-line high-fashion swimwear for plus-size women. She called it Saint Somebody because everyone is beautiful, holy, and special. That's the other reason I called my novel Saint Somebody. And as she says, quote, inspired by all women in their beautiful, diverse, remarkable bodies, we create pieces that feel incredible to wear. Luxury fashion isn't only for one body type, nor should it dictate how we view our bodies. Fashion is about how clothes make us feel. We should feel good. So I told her I'd give her the website URL. I don't care. It's not like it's doing anything for the novel at this point anymore. And she really offered to buy it from me. She says, people sell these for a lot of money. I'm like, I don't need it. It would be wrong. So what she did instead was she told Tuesday to go on their website and pick out swimsuits and she'd send them free. Tuesday has a couple of really kicker swimsuits. And yes, she said I could tell that story. And I just absolutely loved this when Sophie told it to me. What a great idea. And it's all about that I'm not the only person who feels that we're all valuable, lovable, and acceptable, whatever our size. Thanks a lot for watching this video. It would help me out a great deal if you liked the video to give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share this video with others, maybe ring that notification bell so you can be informed when we put out other videos like this. Check out my website and blog at tonylorenzen.com for even more resources that will open your mind, touch your heart, and inspire your spirit.